Atau Oh, okay, so this is from 2007, which was a time when the socialist government was in power in Spain, and the law was passed to finally begin to undertake an official government-sponsored investigation into what happened during the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s. Keep in mind, this is 15 years ago when this law was passed by the socialist government, and money was allocated from the socialist government to begin the investigation. And then the socialist government would lose power and the Conservative Party would come to power in Spain, the Popular Party that you're reading about in the reading on Spain for this week. And the Popular Party would stop the funding, would end funding for the investigation. And so the excavation of the bones that was part of this investigation, as you can see at the beginning of this clip here, you can see them investigating and cleaning away the dirt from these mass graves is going on at this point. And the and then this of course stopped for a long time, and only a few years ago was it resumed when the Socialist Party came back into power. And so here you see another video clip, which is from Al Jazeera from 2018, 11 years after this one, which That's one of the sensitive, very sensitive emotional topics that the um, uh, the authors of the reading this week, they have difficulty discussing it. And by the way, I'm here, as I mentioned, I'm at the International Studies Association meeting, and it's a very big convention in a very big place, and it has high-speed internet. But the reason I mention is because 2 days ago there was a virtual panel, because virtual panels are also part of the convention, along with the regular in-person format. A woman who was a Greek scholar explicitly referenced the Greek Civil War as one of these very emotional topics, and what happened during the Greek Civil War has never yet been fully explored, she claimed, in Greece, and consequently, it remains a very sensitive topic, because the Greeks have never really investigated fully what happened among themselves in terms of the violence and crimes that occurred during the war. And I hope you can hear me. And if not, please let me know. I found a little table in which to set up my computer, and I thought it was far and away from the noise of the convention. But now it's 7 o'clock. Somebody started playing some live music, but hopefully the computer's background noise suppressor will keep that from interfering with my ability to communicate with you. So, all right. So before I forget, I mean, I just thought it was very interesting. Like 2 days, just literally 2 days ago, on one of these virtual panels, the Greek Civil War came up, and that's the first time I've seen something like that come up, that topic come up in any conference. And so let me go to Cyber Campus, and then go to attendance, and go to week 5. Oh my, can you, you have start attendance, and the number is 160, 160. Can you hear me? I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me? Is there any problem? If there's a problem, please let me know. You can hear me? There's no problem? I can't, please speak up so I can hear you. Please speak into your microphones.
We can hear you well.
Good. Okay, and you're not hearing, there's not too much background. I mean, this noise just started. I thought I hid from it, but evidently not far enough. It's on the floor below, but the floor below is, the sound's coming up from the open stairwell. Okay, so good. So let's go on then and talk about the notes, and let me open up those notes. And Greece and Spain, and so and of course we were finishing up the discussion about Greece, but in the last class, but well, we got through much of the discussion on Greece in the last class. But keep in mind that this was a very sensitive topic, the Greek Civil War and America and Britain's role in it. Two sponsors of European integration, Britain and the United States. Of course, Britain supported European integration after the war, and so did the United States. But they also intervened in the Greek Civil War and helped the conservative monarchists to win in that civil war. And there was much resentment about that, because I should tell you that the CIA station chief in Athens was murdered by Greek so-called terrorists, militants who resented obviously what the U.S. and Britain did, and I think that was in 1974. Let me call up Wikipedia here and see if let me do that. Wikipedia, just to show, because CIA station chief Athens murder, and just to show you what Wikipedia has for it here. Yeah, this is the let me do the share screen, and you can see him. This man was Richard Welch, was murdered in 1975 by N17 or 17N, and was this and this was a murder that was never fully addressed in terms of who was involved with it. But the reason I mention it is because when I went to Bulgaria to begin my job in Bulgaria in 1994, N17 then also killed the British military attaché in the British embassy in Greece. And let me see what comes up for that. British attaché, Greek embassy murder. What comes up on yeah, well, and I think this was in 1995 that this person was murdered, or 1994 perhaps. Yeah, you can see N17. These are these Marxist guerrillas. This is a list of so-called terrorism in Greece by N17, and the person that was responsible, the groups that were responsible for the murders of Robert Welch and I'd have to go through and yeah, here it is. Oh, this is 2000. I thought it was later than that. In June 2000, the British diplomatic attaché was murdered by N17 Marxist guerrillas, and the reason why this was interesting because then you know that Greece hosted the Summer Olympics in 2004, and nobody had been arrested for these murders, for these old 1974 and 2000. And then on the eve of the Greek Olympics, the Summer Olympics in Athens, the Greek police suddenly announced that they had arrested the person responsible for the killings of these people, right on the eve of the Greek Summer Olympics in 2004. So again, this is one of these highly sensitive topics that is very important because it relates to nationalism and frustrated nationalist aspirations in the form of political participation by Greeks or Spaniards. And that means challenging the traditional conservative authoritarian, typically monarchies that were in power in Greece under the monarchical regime and that Franco supported, and in Spain, I should say, and in Greece, and today in Saudi Arabia, for example, a monarchical conservative authoritarian regime as the part of the demand of these mobilizing populations to participate fully in the government and shape the government and guide and determine the government and its policies. But during the Cold War, the Americans, particularly the United States, became very suspicious and concerned that anyone that was advocating radical change in their societies, like, for example, socialistic policies of redistributing land to peasants, for example, and taking away the vast land holdings of the landed aristocracy, the Americans became concerned that those individuals, if they were not conscious agents of the Soviet Union, explicit agents and spies working for Stalin, they were then at least dupes or fools who were serving Moscow's world plan for spreading communist domination and therefore Russian domination in the name of communism. And so that's why the KGB and the CIA were involved in struggles all over the world, and virtually in all countries of the world during the Cold War, in the nuclear era, in which they tried to avoid direct, overt military confrontation, which was more common in the previous century, in the 19th century. I mean, countries were always going to war with each other. It was a frequent aspect of international diplomacy. It was considered legitimate to go to war. You can't go to war with your enemy in the nuclear era if both sides have nuclear weapons. You can't go directly to war because it's suicide. And so the CIA and the Soviet Union fought their world competition for influence, whatever the motivation. It may have well have been defensive and fearful motivations on part of both, and each side saw the others as an aggressive imperialist power, and so each side was trying to contain the other. But that's another topic. But this hostility and resentment is an important factor during the immediately after the Cold War, shaping feelings and emotions in Greece and Spain, because, of course, Franco came to power in Spain before the Cold War. He came to power in the 1930s, but Hitler and Stalin played an important role in putting Franco in power. And I mean, a critical role. Hitler and Mussolini, the fascist dictator of Italy, played a critical role in putting in supplying weapons and soldiers even to fight to put Franco in power. And then Franco refused to join Italy and Germany in its wars directly in conquering Europe and Africa. Franco did send a military army division, the Blue Division, to go fight in the Soviet Union on the side of the fascists and Germans and Italians during World War II. But that was it. It was a unit of volunteers who went. But then after World War II was over, Stalin wanted Franco gone, because you saw, they were doing the fascist salute, and the Falange means fascist, and the United States decided that Franco was more useful staying in power, as the United States came to believe that the Soviet Union was a Russian version of Nazi Germany, and that the Americans could work with Franco, because Franco, whatever you thought about Franco, he was definitely anti-communist. That was why he came to power, to fight leftism. And so you see here, this is all very sensitive topic for people, even to this day. As I said, only now are the Spaniards opening up these mass graves and exhuming the skeletons that remain, and to identify them and send their remains home and to their families. Only now are they doing this. And by the way, I mean, since you're studying here in Korea, there's strong parallels with that going on today in Korea. Korea only in the last 15 years, within the last 15 years, has Korea seriously begun the process of examining and unearthing the chaos and terrible violence that happened at the start of the Korean War, when the North invaded the South. The South Korean regime had many people in its jails at the start of the Korean War who were considered leftists or communists. And I got to get rid of this. I didn't expect this to come up. Didn't come up last time. So here, this is an article from, see if I can get rid of this. Maybe I can't. But you can see here, they're blocking me. This didn't come up. But this is a report about it from 2010 that the Korean government, under the president of Korea at the time, which you can't really see so clearly here now, who was a socialist, like Moon Jae-in, the president who just was leaving office now. Moon Jae-in was his chief of staff, was this person's chief of staff at the time when he was president at the time. And they were beginning to investigate and the killings that happened at the start of the Korean War, because the South Korean regime executed all of the leftist prisoners it had in its jails. And so tens of thousands of people were just executed, killed during the start of the war, because they were in South Korea's jails already. And the question is, what role did the American army play? Did the American army give permission? Did the American army know? The American army knew, but they didn't intervene to stop it, because the American army, the American military was already in South Korea. And so, a lot of Koreans have mixed feelings about America's role as well in Korea. But just to show you that and of course, then the socialist government in Korea, the leftist government in Korea, lost power to Lee Myung-bak, who became the conservative president of Korea. And like in Spain, his conservative party stopped funding the investigation into what happened in Korea under the Japanese occupation and the collaboration, what happened during the Korean Civil War to these prisoners. And he was replaced by Park Geun-hye, the daughter of the former dictator, who was ruled from 1962 until 1979 when he was assassinated, Park Chung-hee, and then Moon Jae-in was elected, and Moon Jae-in, he has restarted these investigations. But this is all very sensitive topic, even though these events happened many years ago, many years ago, and so it's all in the context of the Cold War, because because the Americans helped Franco stay in power. When the Americans decided that they needed to work with Franco because Franco was useful, because he was anti-communist, the Americans, they knew who Franco was, that he was a fascist. And so you see here another event. Let me see, I'll open this up. This is, very hurtful to Spanish nationalists, not Spanish nationalists, to many Spanish self-identifiers, because here you see Dwight Eisenhower. There's no sound to it. He's coming to Madrid, Spain, in the 1950s, and greeting and meeting Franco. Remember, President Eisenhower, he had been the leader of the British, French, and American and Canadian forces fighting fascism in Europe during World War II. And now he comes to Spain, in Madrid, in what does it say here? Does it say when? What year it was? 1959. And he's coming to Madrid, and here you see him coming to meet Franco, and the explicit fascist leader. I mean, he's the fascist salute and everything. And so here you see him getting off his plane and being greeted by, there they are, Eisenhower and Franco and his prime minister, and there's Franco. And so for many Spaniards, this is very all unsettling and gives them mixed feelings about America's role. And then, eventually, when the Cold War ended, and Franco died in 1975, he was not overthrown. There was not a revolution. He died in his sleep. So the Spaniards don't have the luxury of believing that they overthrew him, because they didn't. He died peacefully in his sleep, and so here you see. Let's see, what else do I have here? Franco's last speech in 1975. You see him, and he had a lot of supporters too. I mean, he had a tremendous amount of support as well. And just to go through here. And there's the future king, Juan Carlos, who, when he died that same year, he became the head of state. He was the prince of, he was a son of the former king who stepped down, and he claimed he was ruling as regent on behalf of him. And he was a young man, and then he died, and he became king of Spain. And he was king of Spain until, a few years ago. And he played an important role in preventing the military. After he died, the military tried to seize power in 1980 in Spain, because they were unhappy about Spanish politics and the democracy, and the opening to Catalan patriots and Basque patriots to be more active in making their demands. And then he intervened. He played an important role at that critical time in suppressing that attempted military coup. I think it was in 1980 when I was in college, my freshman year. And then he ended up resigning a few years ago in the midst of a scandal, and being financial scandal. And he now lives in Dubai as a guest of another monarch, the Sultan of Dubai, I guess, or United Arab Emirates. And his son Felipe V is now king of Spain. So this was an authoritarian traditional regime, right? It was a regime. It wasn't really like Hitler's regime, even though it used the term fascist. It was a mix of fascism and authoritarian traditional conservative regime. As I told you, the Catholic Church in the 1940s and 1950s really before it liberalized, admired this regime because he closely cooperated with the Catholic Church, with Catholic religious order, Opus Dei, you know, that Don Brown in his book, what was the name of that book that was very popular about Jesus and Mary Magdalene? I can't remember but Opus Dei is a big theme in that book. There was a film made about it, and so that is the legacy of the European Union coming to play an important role in its role changing to help now to focus on helping to stabilize new young democracies, Spain and Greece and Portugal as well. But you're not reading about Portugal. Portugal had a regime that was like a Franco type regime under Salazar in Portugal, and they all democratized. Both of them democratized in the mid-1970s, and so did Greece because of the failed Cyprus War, and then the European Union moved, you know, to a new operation, a new task, which was to help the democratization process. This time in Western Europe, in Spain, Portugal, and Greece, and help encourage and stabilize these new young democratic regimes. Remember, the Cold War is still going on at this time, But then, of course, later after the end of the Cold War in 1989, the European Union would then also see that as its function in post-communist Bulgaria, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, the Baltic states to stabilize these new young post-communist democracies in Eastern Europe. But Spain and Greece were the first efforts of the European Union to what was then the European community to change and develop to include more of a explicit focus on stabilizing democracy in vulnerable young democracies. And so of course, these regimes, Portugal, Spain, and Greece, they had advantages over Poland and Bulgaria and Czechoslovakia and Hungary in that they had always been integrated into the capitalist world system. So they had banks, for example. They were corporatist systems in which the government controlled and guided the private sector. Didn't control it, but very strongly guided and dominated the private sector. But they had markets, they had banks, they had economic capitalist institutions, which were pretty well developed, at least in Spain in particular, because Spain's economy is doing quite well, right? But in post-communist Poland or post-communist Bulgaria or post-communist Romania, they were starting from a much more difficult economic conditions than Spain. I mean, Spain's economy was growing at a rapid rate by the middle of the 20th century as a consequence of economic reforms, even before it democratized. So, he came to power in the 1930s when capitalism and democracy was not looking very well, was not functioning very well. I mean, it was as a result of, as I mentioned, democratic elections that Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933 in Germany. And the world capitalist system had given the world the Great Depression that made it the political conditions supportive for radical solutions that Hitler and Franco and Mussolini promised in the form of authoritarian populist corporatism. And so here's another nice little clip that I want to show you where Franco openly says, "I've come to power and we're going to institute a totalitarian order. I'm going to reestablish order in Spain. No more chaos, no more anarchy, no more chaos, no more anarchy." And these are the terms that the fascists, including the Nazis and Franco, are using in the 1930s, that there's so much chaos that we are unable to solve our problems. We are unable to give people work. We can't get the economy growing again so people can get jobs to feed their children and have housing. And with politicians fighting each other and sometimes violently, like in the Spanish Civil War. And we are going to establish order. And of course, another solution was a solution being offered by Stalin, not authoritarian conservative populism, but authoritarian radical Marxist-Leninism. That's another solution that is being offered, but they're both authoritarian, right? That democracy is unable to solve our problems. It cannot do what it needs to do, a democratic political system to give us a future, particularly an economic and secure future. And the European Union emerges within that framework after World War II with this awareness that we have to cooperate among us, the founders of the European Coal and Steel Community, to show Europeans, our people and other people, other Europeans, that democracy and capitalism can work and are better and the best systems, but it requires that the leaders of Europe must cooperate with each other. They can't be competing with each other in vicious, violent forms. They have to cooperate and help each other if we're going to be able to keep our democratic, capitalist, social, democratic, political, and economic systems in power. We have to cooperate, and we have to trust each other to some extent, and we have to create institutions that make it easier to cooperate, collaborate, coordinate, and communicate so that we can trust each other. And we will do that by increasing transparency in our policymaking process, beginning with the coal and steel community, the coal and steel industry, right? And so here's a speech where, it's just interesting to hear a person say, totalitarianism is good. Totalitarianism is good, right? So you see him, let me see if I can show this here. Make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Okay, so that's his speech declaring what he's going to do now that he is dictator. He won the Civil War, but he won the Civil War because of massive military intervention by the Germans and the Italians. Stalin sent some, but I mean, the German Air Force bombed Guernica. And of course, some of you who are familiar with art know about Pablo Picasso and Pablo Picasso's famous paintings, including, see, I can go back here to Guernica, right? Which shows the damage done to the city of Guernica as a consequence of, I think it was German aerial bombing by the German Nazi Air Force, the Luftwaffe, to help Franco defeat his enemies in the, let me see, make sure you're seeing that, Guernica, right? And, and I already mentioned how Mussolini sent 60,000 soldiers and their equipment to go fight on Franco's side. And Stalin sent some, but not nearly as much. And other people volunteered. Those of you who are interested in English literature know about George Orwell, and he fought as a volunteer on behalf of the Republicans, fighting the fascists, fighting Franco and the Falange, and was wounded, and wrote a book called Homage to Catalonia, describing his experience in the Civil War as fighting as a volunteer on behalf of the Republicans. And the Americans sent the Lincoln Brigade of volunteers who went to fight on behalf of the Republicans against the fascists. And they were pretty much untrained, and they were pretty much wiped away, destroyed, the Lincoln Brigade. Okay, so that's the context in which you're reading about Spain and Greece this week. So let me go back to the notes but I think go back to talking about Greece So he does the readings does mention that strong anti-Western Westernism characterized much of Greece following the bloody civil war from 1946 to 1949. And along with pressure being put on Turkey by Stalin, whatever the motivations, if the Soviet Union was worried about being attacked again, or the Soviet Union was, as Americans believed, a Russian version of Nazi Germany, this pressure on Greece, this pressure on Turkey, other pressure on other countries that Americans believed the Soviets were behind in, and what they were doing in Eastern Europe led Truman, U.S. President Truman, to declare the Truman Doctrine, that the Americans would support democratic governments who were being threatened by authoritarian communists trying to overthrow their systems, and this was notable. This Greek Civil War, for a number of reasons, including the fact that the British were the first outside actor that was intervening to suppress the Greek Communist Party's uprising. But then the British were exhausted from the war. They were a middle-ranking power. They were exhausted from the war, and the British informed the Americans that they could not take the lead in maintaining friendly governments in Greece and elsewhere. And so the Americans made the decision under Truman that they had to replace the British and take the lead in supporting pro-Western governments, and anti-radical, anti-socialist party movements in these states as part of the Cold War. And but they would rely, you would see that the Americans would rely upon British advice and British intelligence to guide the American resources, because America had vast amounts of resources, right? And so, the expression was that during the Cold War, the Americans would provide the money, the resources, the brawn, and the British would provide the brains. British brains and American brawn, because the British had established networks of agents and assets, political agents and assets, covert and overt, throughout this region during the British Empire, that the Americans would then come to rely upon and utilize as they took over Britain's role in the Middle East, in particular in the Middle East, if you consider Greece part of the Middle East, and elsewhere, and support support British allies from the British imperial times in opposition to radical forces that the Americans believed were working for Moscow intentionally or unintentionally. And this would include, for example, putting the Shah of Iran in power. I'm going off tangent here, in 1953 with the advice of the British MI5 and utilizing British MI5 resources, the internal security service of the British. So the British considered Iran to be an internal security issue, and put the Shah of Iran back in power in 1953, and he would be overthrown by Ayatollah Khomeini in 1978, 1979, and bring us the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is an adversary of the United States ever since, since the Islamic Republic of Iran was established, in great hostility to the Americans because of America's role in putting the Shah in power and the Shah's cruel, despotic, totalitarian regime that ruled from beginning in 1953 until he was overthrown in 1978, 1979, when I was a senior in high school. So, and so there was political turmoil in the 1960s. Again, culminating in another military dictatorship from 1967 to 1974, and that stopped any further prospect of European integration, because different countries, including the British, are saying, "Hey, this European economic community, this looks like it's a real significant actor. It could be very useful." So different countries are negotiating with the European Economic Community, as it became known in 1957 with the Treaty of Rome, and but then there was a military dictatorship. Again, what role did the Americans play? It's not really clear. I can't find anything on last time I checked. The Americans knew that the Greek colonels were preparing a coup. The Greek military army colonels were preparing a coup. They didn't tell, evidently, the Greek government that there was a coup coming. So, but did the American CIA play a role in organizing it? I mean, as we know, as I told you, 1975, the American CIA station chief would be murdered by N-17. And then, of course, when again, since Russia under Putin is attempting to unify much of Ukraine with Russia, the Greek colonels, their appeals to Greek nationalism attempted to unify Cyprus, the former British colony island in Cyprus, which is two-thirds, at least two-thirds Greek, that it was that became an independent country in 1964 to try to unify Cyprus with Greece as part of the homeland of Greece in terms of Greek irredentism. They attempted to instigate or encourage Cypriot Greek officers to overthrow Archbishop Makarios' government and declare ionosis, or unification, with unity with Greece. And then the Turkish army invaded northern Cyprus to protect the Turkish minority there in Greece because of the hostility of Greek nationals to Turkey, and that debacle of the partition of Cyprus that still exists today. There's still the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus still exists, but is only recognized by Turkey. That debacle, that humiliation, caused the military junta to collapse in 1974 and for democracy to come to Greece. And keep that in mind, right? That again, it's kind of an awkward experience for new Greek democracy to emerge in the midst of a nationalist failure. That, Greeks feel very strongly about Cyprus, right? To this present day, even though Cyprus is not part of Greece, of course, that Greece only agreed to expansion of the European Union into Eastern Europe, the former communist countries, on the terms that Cyprus would also be brought into the European Union, even though 1/3 of the country is occupied still by the Turkish army. 40,000 Turkish troops have been in Cyprus since the 1970s, and they're still there. And so you have a country that's in the European Union, Cyprus, which it doesn't control all of its territory. And so there's precedent for maybe bringing in Ukraine or Georgia into the European Union, even if the Russians control part of it, because they brought in Cyprus into the European Union, and Turkey's controlled 1/3 of Cypriot territory since the 1974. And of course, the European Union insists under Greek pressure that Turkey can never join the European Union until it withdraws from Cyprus and allows Cyprus to reunify. And those negotiations have gone on and on and on and on. And pretty much Turkey has given up hope of ever being allowed to join the European Union, despite the fact that it is officially a candidate member of the European Union, for a number of reasons, including this Cypriot issue and the inability to come to an agreement to reunify Cyprus under some kind of confederation or confederate system that would protect the rights of the Turkish minority there. But again, I mean, the point is that there is, this is something for me to keep in mind, because I just reminded myself of it here. There's precedent for bringing a country into the European Union that doesn't control all of its territory, and that's Cyprus. So, and of course, Russia's occupying part of Ukraine, and it occupies or supports separatism in Georgia. So the restoration of democracy in 1974 rekindled the European ambitions of Greece to join what was then the European community. Karamanlis returned from self-imposed exile in Paris to lead the process of the transition to democracy. He was a conservative. Again, to show the importance of still the traditional orientations towards authority and politics in Greece, partly because of the stunted Greek revolution, the suppressed Greek revolution, is the fact that these are like political dynasties. Karamanlis his son would become a prime minister of Greece, and you'll read others as well. But let's go on here. Because that's the evidence of traditionalism in politics, this notion of political dynasties, that people have the right last name, that they have some kind of political credit because they come from a traditional leading political family, right? Like, Park Chung-hee's daughter, Park Geun-hye, becomes president of South Korea. And we have that in America too, with the Kennedy family and other families. But anyway, so Karamanlis had established that he was a strong European, strong pro-European. In other words, he's willing to cooperate with the British and the Americans, despite what they did. The British and the Americans did. during the Civil War and afterwards. And Europeanization was seen as necessary to safeguard Greece's long-term stability. The Karamanlis government began Greece's European Economic Community membership application on 17 July 1975, just the year following the collapse of the military junta. Karamanlis understood that Greece's economic conditions and capacities for European Economic Community membership were not strong. And as I said, I mean, just to jump ahead, what I said earlier, the European Commission said, you know, Greece economically is still not really prepared to accept fully the responsibilities and conditions of the European Economic Community membership. But the other members of the European Economic Community decided to bring in Greece because they wanted to stabilize the Greek government. And again, this is still during the Cold War. Greece has a border with communist Bulgaria. And the Americans were convinced that the Soviet Union and the communist countries were an expansionist threat. So Karamanlis, he emphasized the Cold War international political significance of Greece and its internal politics at this point to consolidate Greece's democracy in a country bordering on the Soviet bloc in the south and the Middle East on the east. So of course, you know, there was a war in 1973, Arab-Israeli war, and Cyprus is close to the Middle East. Cyprus is a center of Middle East banking as well. So the European Commission, in its evaluation of Greece and its avis of the Greek economy, warned that, you know, its evaluation warned that Greece's accession to the European Economic Community would lead to some serious domestic disruptions as well as cost the European Economic Community economy. But in other words, it wasn't ready to join. But Karamanlis personally and effectively lobbied the French president, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, another conservative, and the German chancellor, Helmut Schmidt. Helmut Schmidt was a social democrat, but the French was led by Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, a Gaullist, the follower of Charles de Gaulle, who, by the way, in 2004 would be the chairman of the European Union Constitutional Convention to draft the European Union Constitution Treaty that the French themselves voted down in 2005, despite the fact that a former French president, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, was the chairperson of the European Constitutional Convention that drafted that European Constitutional draft Constitution for the European Union. And by the way, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing last year died of COVID. He died of COVID in his late 80s. He was very old. COVID took him. COVID-19 killed him. And then, of course, Helmut Schmidt had earlier responded to inquiries about Greece's membership ambitions by applying "over my dead body." But of course, the Germans were not in any condition to tell the French no on this. Again, this is during the Cold War. Helmut Schmidt, by the way, he had been the foreign minister under Willy Brandt. When Willy Brandt fell on his knees in Warsaw in 1970, his foreign minister was Helmut Schmidt. I should tell you, Helmut Schmidt just died a few years ago. He was in his late 90s. He was strongly opposed to the European Union signing an association agreement with the Ukraine in 2014 that triggered the fighting between Russia and Ukraine that began in 2014 and then continued, finally escalated this year into the full-scale invasion. He thought that was a disaster. He thought Ukraine is in Russia's sphere of influence. The European Union should not be going into Ukraine. He was strongly opposed to it. Karamanlis also moved quickly because the military dictatorships in Portugal and Spain had also ended, and they had also applied to join the European Economic Community. Consequently, the European Council, that's the name of the meeting, the name given to the meeting of the heads of government and state in European Economic Community. In other words, the prime ministers and presidents. That's their, when they meet, it's called the European Council. The European Council overruled the Commission's objections, authorizing the opening of a session of negotiations for Greece to accede to the European Union in July 1976. Negotiations moved quickly. Greece's accession treaty was signed in May 1979. Greece formally acceded to the European Economic Community on 1st of January 1981. Less than 6 years Oh, after the transition to democracy. So I was wrong. I'm sorry. It was Spain and Portugal that joined in 1984. Greece joined in 1981. In 1981, less than 6 years after transitioning to democracy. And so the Greek public at large had contradicting expectations regarding what the European Economic Community membership would involve and the challenges it would entail regarding the Greek public policy and the economy. And yes, this Greek desire to join the European Economic Community and later the Eurozone was so desperate. I mean, that was part of the reason why, I think one of the reasons why the Greek statistics, wrong statistics about the size of the budget deficit that would lead to the Eurozone crisis and the sovereign debt crisis and the Greek debt crisis in 2009, 2010 was partly because Greece was desperate to get in the Eurozone, because this is going to fully prove to us and those Turks who we don't like that Greece is truly European, right? Because we belong to the Eurozone. So these discrepancies would characterize Greece's tumultuous relationship with the European community for decades following. Then when Karamanlis and the conservatives lose party, they're replaced by the socialists. In fact, Greeks, opposite to Greece's accession to the European Economic Community was a significant factor in the electoral landslide victory of the Greek Socialist Party, or PASOK, in October 1981. Yeah, and again, this resentment and there's resentment in Italy as well, because the CIA played an active role in subverting Italian democracy to keep the Italian Communist Party out of power in Italy during the Cold War. But again, PASOK had flirted with anti-Westernism under the slogan, the European Economic Community and NATO are the same syndicate. PASOK campaigned on the commitment to withdraw from the European Economic Community, and it was led by Andreas Papandreou. And Papandreou had fled Greece when under the military dictatorship, and Andreas Papandreou became a college professor in the United States and taught in economics, I believe, in Chicago. And his son, George Papandreou, was born and raised there. And George Papandreou would then also become prime minister of Greece at the start of the financial crisis. And, he's born and raised in America. His English is better than mine. And he became prime minister later. So, but going back to PASOK at this time, once it gained power, however, PASOK's European Economic Community stance moderated. However, it continued to be an opponent, or a public opponent, to Western and American particular policies, particularly in the Middle East. Its foreign policy positions continue, however, to be a source of aggregation. So PASOK showed a tendency evident among socialist parties elsewhere in the European Economic Community, such as in France, that due to pragmatic and ideological change, they acquiesced and accommodated to European economic integration. And of course, by joining the European Economic Community, Greece got big benefits, because Greece was much more agricultural economy than any other economy in Western Europe, at least in comparison to France and Germany and Italy, maybe more like Portugal and Spain. But the point is that by joining the European Economic Community, Greece got access to the common agricultural policy and the regional funds that were funds set up by the European Economic Community to help the poor regions of the European Economic Community more rapidly develop and modernize their economies in order to more rapidly develop those poor regions, so that there would be stronger economic and political cooperation and cohesion among all of the member states of the European Union. So big money starts coming into Greece, in this country of 10 million people, through the common agricultural policy and the regional funds. And I was just thinking about the common agricultural policy with the crisis in Ukraine and Russia, which supply, I think, 40% of the world's wheat exports, Ukraine and Russia, and those exports are being hampered or damaged The European Union has always defended the common agricultural policy of the European Union, despite American attacks. America has attacked the common agricultural policy, claiming that it subsidizes inefficient European farmers at the expense of the greater efficiency of American and Canadian, Australian farmers, and that in order to subsidize inefficient European farmers, and that it's not right, and that they should stop wasting this money to subsidize inefficient European agriculture. And I'm sure there are lots of people in Brussels today saying, see, we were wise to have the common agricultural policy is to guarantee food security in Europe, because that's the justification. The common agricultural policy was necessary to guarantee food security in Europe. That was the justification anyway. The explicit rhetorical justification that Europe has to be able to feed itself if it has to. And now with the war in Ukraine, I'm certain there are lots of supporters of the common agricultural policy saying, see, we were wise to maintain our support for European farmers. But of course, the Greek government and the Greek state and the Greek administrative system is so weak, and that means corrupt, that Greece hasn't benefited as much as it should from the economic aid from the European Union because of the weaknesses. How do they phrase it? The weaknesses in Greece's domestic governance structures. In other words, the government is very ineffective and very corrupt. So a lot of this money just disappears into people's pockets. Still, that's a lot of money to come into a country of 10 million people. And so Greeks could point to the tangible benefits that came from the seeding of the European Economic Community. And then the Cold War began to decline, and collapsed in 1989, but its decline in the 1980s also undermined the significance for PASOK of attempting to chart its own foreign policy orientation. So as the Cold War ended and then the Soviet Union, communist regimes in the Soviet Union disintegrated, Greece's emphasis on foreign policy and its opposition to the Americans became less and less important. Greece had emphasized and supported the non-aligned movement that was originally founded partly by Tito in Yugoslavia, who had supported the Marxist uprising in Greece, the communist uprising in Greece during the Civil War, and also by India under Nehru. And then here it is, the PASOK Prime Minister, Andreas Papandreou, understood that the European Economic Community was the primary stage for Greece. And so after the Cold War ended, a remarkable pro-European party consensus came to characterize Greece. The Greek public was also most positively predisposed to European integration according to public opinion polls. And, and that was a lesson that has, I should also mention, it was learned from this experience, that another reason why the common agricultural policy is supported is because it was seen as a way by which to strengthen the economic incentives for the people of Greece or the people of Poland or the people of Bulgaria in these heavily agricultural economies that emerged after the fall of communism. Still, one-third of the population, about one-third of the population in post-communist Bulgaria, in Romania, in Poland in 1990, were still farmers or involved in farming. And the common agricultural policy benefits went to them when they joined the European Union. And the European Union is requiring far-reaching, difficult changes that are upsetting and unsettling people's lives that have been established under communist systems. And they're being, they didn't live well, but they had security. They lived not well much at all, but they had security. And now European integration is generating a world of tremendous change and creating tremendous insecurity. And the common agricultural policy is critical for building support in these countries for European integration, even if there are other forces like Viktor Orban in Hungary that attack the European Union, or the Polish government attacking the European Union under the Law and Justice Party in Poland. You'll read about Poland later. That still there was tremendous vested economic interest among even those groups that support Law and Justice Party in Poland, the farmers, the rural Society of Poland is the strongest source of support for Law and Justice Party, Conservative Party in Poland. The rural farmers, the rural population, Hungary is the strongest source of support for Viktor Orban and the Fidesz Party in Hungary that has been criticized for being anti-democratic or illiberal. But how far is that anti-democratic or illiberal policy going to go? I mean, Hungary is not going to sacrifice all of that money that it gets from the European Union, including predominantly in the form of aid and support for Hungarian agriculture or Polish agriculture or Bulgarian agriculture. So to go on here, significant domestic constraints limited Greece's Europeanization. You know, it's really, I mean, now that I'm recalling these notes, I mean, it's just really depressing because the Greek government, the Greek economy has not grown as rapidly as anywhere rapidly as people had hoped when it joined the European Union. And that's an important point to keep in mind, or the European Economic Community as it was back then, that economic development is a political issue. It requires a strong, effective state. And that means a state whose personnel is committed, who are professional, who view themselves as the representatives of the nation and representatives of the sovereign nation in a full effort at self-expression. And again, we keep coming back to the Greek Civil War. The Greek state is remarkably ineffective because the Greek state is a source of embarrassment because it was forced upon the Greeks, partly by Greek and American covert intervention. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? I mean, when you look at, for example, how rapidly Slovenia has grown since it joined the European Union in 2004, or the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, these are former communist countries, and they are doing much better economically than Greece, even though Greece has been formally capitalistic forever. Even under the military dictatorship, it was capitalistic. So, I mean, I think it's a fascinating case that, you know, so they talk about, despite all of this money being brought in, the Greek economy began to diverge from the European Economic Community average despite significant increases in public spending and ballooning foreign debt. Greece therefore performed disappointingly compared to the other states that joined the European Economic Community in the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s. I mean, Poland, when communism finally collapsed in Poland, I was there when communism ended in Poland. And the new Polish government under Lech Walesa and the anti-communist pro-solidarity trade union government, they had an economic plan that was developed for transforming the Polish economy in the so-called shock therapy approach. And they were advised by an famous American economist, Jeffrey Sachs, Harvard economist, the youngest person in Harvard, or at least ever to get a PhD in economics from Harvard. He was a wunderkind, a brilliant man, and it was implemented under Leszek Balcerowicz, who was the head of the ministry, economics ministry, or the finance ministry in Poland. And they had a plan, and they came into power, and they undertook radical economic reforms, and they're going to modernize Poland, and they're going to return Poland to Europe. And they did it, and they were committed, despite the tremendous changes, the tremendous shock to people's lifestyles, because, you know, they were used to 45 years of communism, right? Supported by the Soviet Union with generous oil subsidies. But then you contrast that with Greece. Greece never really did that. So they mentioned it, Greece, and it's kind of a mystery. Like, why is the Greek state so ineffective? And I think you have to go back to the fact that Greeks are, how do I phrase it? I'm trying to phrase it in simple ways, that they're embarrassed by their state. That the state is something that is not really part of Greece. It's something that you join to get money, and get money for your family and your friends, and get them jobs, patronage, right? It's not your, it doesn't, it's something that you should exploit that you should avoid, that you should, if you can't avoid it, you should exploit it. And they trace that to the Ottoman legacy. And, okay, maybe, yeah, that's part of it. But the Ottoman legacy is there in part because Greece never really had a successful popular revolution. I mean, the overthrow of the junta in 1974, that occurred again in the midst of national humiliation. Greeks believe Cyprus is Greek. And it's the only reason why it's not part of Greece is because the Turkish army is illegally occupying the hated Turkish army. The Ottoman legacy, the Ottoman successor state is occupied the northern third of the island and ethnically cleansed the Greeks. The Greeks fled that lived there and the Turks fled from the Greek part of the island. And so it's like, even now, the Greek state is this embarrassment. All right, so PASOK lost power to a center-right government under the New Democracy Party, the Conservative Party, under Konstantinos Mitsotakis, and his son, I think, is the prime minister in Greece now. Let me type in. I mean, again, they're showing the preservation of these traditional conservative structures that were inherited from traditional times and that were supported during the Cold War, because they were not radical. So Mitsotakis, I think his son is, you can see he was the prime minister that we're talking about now, and and Greece, that's him. He's the son of Konstantin Mitsotakis. And so let's go back to the notes. And the Mitsotakis government failed to deliver on its pledge to liberalize the Greek economy. So they're conservatives, right? They're supposed to be in favor of liberalization, but they couldn't do it. And then, of course, Yugoslavia began to disintegrate violently. After Tito died in 1980, it slowly unraveled. And then finally, in the early 1990s, violence broke out among the groups in Yugoslavia. Nationalistic tendencies increasingly displayed in Greek internal politics also obstructed cooperation with the rest of the European Union. We come back to the Greek Civil War. When Yugoslavia disintegrated, Macedonia, the Republic of Macedonia, became a separate republic out of the remains of Yugoslavia, because Yugoslavia consisted of 5 republics: Slovenia, Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia, and Macedonia. And so Macedonia became formally an independent state because Yugoslavia disintegrated, and the Greeks were concerned that Macedonia was going to encourage those Slavic Macedonian ethnic minority living in northern Greece that had been the core of the Communist Party in Greece and the core of this uprising, that they were going to rise up and try to separate territory from Greece and join with this new state, Macedonia. And so Greek nationalism becomes involved. And that was only resolved, 2 or 3 years ago, finally, because the Greek government insisted that they were not going to recognize Macedonia under the name Macedonia, because they claim Macedonia is part of Greece. It's part of a region of Greece where Alexander the Great of Macedonia came from, and that's in Greece. And they're not going to accept a country on their northern border called Macedonia, because the implicit claim was the implicit worry was that it would encourage the Slavic Macedonians who live in Greece as a suppressed minority, an oppressed minority, to become active and rise up and try to join Macedonia and separate territory from Greece. And that was only resolved after decades of negotiation under the Prespa Accords, which I think were reached in 2018. And so for the longest time, that region in North Macedonia was called the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. That's how Greece insisted upon it being called, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. And they would not allow the European Union or NATO, which Greece belonged to change its name. So even European Union and NATO called it officially the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, FYROM, F-Y-R-O-M for short, FYROM. And and Macedonia would not be able to join NATO or join the European Union until that name dispute was settled, and the American diplomat who was responsible for those negotiations was the son of Admiral Nimitz from World War II, the commander of the American Navy in the Pacific during World War II and the Pacific War. His son, Nimitz, was the diplomat put in charge of the negotiations that went on and on and on over the name for the Republic of Macedonia. So if I show you that, if I go here, Republic of Northern Macedonia. Okay, so go here, making sure you can see that, share screen, and go here. And so here you see, and it's now called North Macedonia. The name, it was agreed to, when was it agreed to? Yeah, in June 2018, Macedonia and Greece resolved the dispute with an agreement that the country should rename itself Republic of North Macedonia, and the renaming came into effect in February 2019. And that was partly because Greece's diplomatic bargaining leverage became much, much weaker because it desperately needed these big loans from Germany and the rest of the European Union and the IMF as a result of its sovereign debt crisis. It received, as I said, 350 billion euros. This country of 10 million people, 350 billion euros in financial guarantees and aid, primarily from Germany, to keep it from defaulting on its debt and stay in the Eurozone and stay in the European Union. Thereby, by avoiding a default, it could stay in the Eurozone and the European Union. And so, again, nationalism, 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 nationalism. And so, yeah. So anyway, you can read more if you're interested. You know, supposedly, I mean, there have been reports that Andreas Papandreou contacted the leadership of Bulgaria, the new democratic leadership of Bulgaria, about maybe intervening in invading Macedonia and partitioning it, right? In 1994, I mean, it's never been fully proved. The Bulgarian people I've talked to insist it didn't happen. But you know, there's been one British reporter reported that Andreas Papandreou, the leader of Greece, actually contacted the new democratic government in Bulgaria and inquired about invading and partitioning Macedonia. And so in 1994, the Papandreou-PASOK government, then in power, imposed an economic embargo on firearms on the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. In January 1996, Kostas Simitis became prime minister while the pace of economic reform accelerated. And then his son, I think Simitis is another ruling family in Greece. I think Kostas Simitis, let me check here. I think his son. So I mean, it's interesting, right? Kostas Simitis, and I think his son. Maybe I spoke too soon. I thought he had a son. No, he doesn't have a son. Sorry, he has two daughters. So I overstepped. But these families, because he has two daughters, so it's hard. You know, Greece is very traditional. It's difficult to imagine, you know, a woman becoming prime minister of Greece because they're very patriarchal, traditional society, like the Balkans in general. Papandreou had resigned due to ill health. Like Karamanli, Simitis placed the EU as the foundation of his political strategy. Simitis strove to have Greece meet the obligations to qualify to participate in the European Union, economic and monetary union as his top priority. In other words, to have Greece join the Eurozone when it started. And he warned his fellow Greeks that if Greece did not succeed, then it would be economically marginalized. And deepening Europeanization of Greece would help modernize it in addressing long-term economic and social problems. Right? I mean, that's true about the Greeks and a number of countries that are coming out of imperial domination. And I think it's, you know, maybe Gloria can disagree, but it's also true in Italy, that in Italy and Southern Europe, there's this admiration for the European Union, that the European Union is going to make their states, of which they're somewhat embarrassed, modern. That modernization, joining the European Union, European integration is going to modernize their states of their nations, because they view themselves as kind of backward compared to Germany and France. So they're kind of embarrassed. During 8-year government of Simitis, Greece registered very high economic growth rates and substantial reductions of its budget deficit and its inflation rate. Yeah, well, it registered very high economic growth rates. Greece informed the European Union that, yes, we have really good economic growth rates. Yeah. Greece therefore qualified as the 12th member of the Eurozone in June 2000. I mean, they found out that the statistics were completely wrong. The euro was physically introduced on 1 January 2002, and Simitis pointed to his government's other achievements in the European Union, including the accession of Cyprus to the European Union, yay, and opening EU accession negotiations for Turkey in order to encourage Cyprus reunification. And Greece had supported it since 1996. In the 2003 Thessalonica agenda for integrating the Western Balkans, in other words, for bringing in the former Yugoslav states. Of course, the prospect of joining the European Union didn't prevent war in Yugoslavia among the Serbs and the Croats and the Bosnians, even though the European Economic Community was pleading and promising big money to the Yugoslav republics. If they resolved their disputes peacefully, they could join to the European Union. Look what happened with Greece, look what happened with Spain and Portugal, but that did not prevent war, civil war among the Croats, Slovenes, and Bosniaks and Kosovo Albanians. The next government, again, Karamanlis comes back into power with Premier Kostas Karamanlis, challenged the validity of, he challenged the validity of the economic statistics up until that point. And then he ordered a fiscal audit in 2005. And it led to an upward revision of the Greek budget deficit and current debt figures. And it caused significant damage to Greece's reputation in the European Union. Again, Greece's reputation was already damaged because Greece and the Greek Cypriots, the Greeks in Cyprus and Greece, they don't really want to compromise sufficiently on reunifying Cyprus. They don't want to give benefits to the Turkish Cypriots, the Turkish people in Cyprus, as a result of Turkey's occupation of the northern 1/3 of Cyprus. Again, there's this sentiment that Cyprus is Greek land that the Ottomans conquered and the Turkish army is occupying, and you can't give a benefit to those people for their crime. Of course, the Turks have another view, right? Their view is what Ralph Denktash, he was the longtime leader of the Turkish Cypriots. He pointed to Crete. Crete is the 4th biggest island in the Mediterranean after Sardinia, Corsica, Cyprus. The 4th biggest one is Crete, and Crete is part of Greece. There used to be a big Turkish minority on the island of Crete, but there is no Turkish minority on the island of Crete now. And you know why? They left. And you know why they left? Because life became miserable for them under Greek control. Life became miserable. And that's not going to happen to the Turkish people of Cyprus. The Karamanlis government also continued to be unable or unwilling to provide satisfactory, accurate reports about the magnitude of the financial problems in the Greek economy to Eurostat. That's the European Union Economic Monitoring Body. It was the beginning of the Greek statistics scandal. It focused EU attention. It was a focus of EU attention up to the European Union bailouts. And Karamanlis was defeated in the election of 2009, replaced by a new PASOK government under George Papandreou, the son of Andreas, who was forced to reveal the full extent of Greece's financial difficulties. Now, I have to say, I remember I was reading the Financial Times during the Greek Olympics in 2004, right? And it's not as if the European Union didn't know what was going on in Greece. They knew that the Greek statistics were poor or bad, but it wasn't an economic crisis, right? It wasn't a political problem. The Greek economy was growing. There wasn't a problem with the financial system in Greece because foreign investors were still buying Greek bonds. It was only when the international financial business community began to question the value of investing in Greek bonds and challenge the statistics of the Greek government. That's when it became a political problem, and that was then that the European Union was forced to act. It's not like, because I remember reading it. I mean, the European Union the Financial Times reported about how, wow, the Greeks spent so much money to have a beautiful Olympics. Look at all the stadiums and Olympic facilities they built, like how South Korea built all those facilities in 1988 for its Olympics. They spent all of this money. How could they afford this? It was a wonderful Olympics. It was a beautiful Olympics. But the Financial Times knew that there's something wrong with the statistics, but everybody said, well, it's not a problem. What's the problem? And then when the international financial markets, the international business community began to doubt that Greece was ever really going to pay back all of those debts, all these bonds, they stopped buying Greek debt. They stopped buying Greek bonds to fund the Greek government's budget deficit. And that's when the crisis exploded. And that's when the European Union and Greece were forced to deal with the problems of the Greek state. And if the European Union is going to provide 350 billion euros in total in 3 packages, I think it was 3 packages. This is before the COVID-19 pandemic, right? They're going to demand that Greece change its ways. That means, for example, raising the retirement age from 55 years old. That means being able to collect taxes that people owe, making sure it's not stolen. The money collected is not stolen. That means making it easier to hire and fire Greek workers because the Greek trade unions were strong. So the impact of EU membership on party politics and public opinion, and the emergence of a stable and mainly bipolar political system centered around new democracy on the center right and PASOK on the center left is one of the key successes of Greece's transition to democracy. So, you can say that Europeanization did help stabilize Greek democracy. 2 main parties emerged. They vie for control, center left, center right, looks more stable. They control 70% of the vote. Radical Marxists, Leninists, or Greek fascists, they're marginal actors. They were marginal actors, marginal political parties. Keep in mind, the Communist Party in Greece was very powerful, at one point before it was suppressed. So since democratization, 1974, PASOK had been in power for 23 years and New Democracy for 14 years. And so you had this smooth bipolar alteration of power, which was unprecedented in the modern history of Greece, particularly in comparison with the immediate post-war years, the Civil War years. On the other hand, this party bipolarity was criticized as well for harboring clientelism, that's patronage, and corruption. And so support for the European Union became a remarkable instance of cross-party consensus in Greece, especially so with PASOK's pro-European Union orientation during the mid-1980s. And the only political party in Greece with a consistently anti-European position has been the Greek Communist Party, the CUK, which maintains an orthodox Marxist-Leninist official position. And its political support ranges or has ranged between 5 and 10%. So, you know, it's small, but not insignificant. That's a significant percentage of the vote. It voted against all major EU treaties in the Greek parliament. And so there's some discussion about how the reformist left in Greece has been more ambivalent about Greece's relations with the European Union. The KKE broke up and split up over this issue. The KKE of the Interior split from the KKE, the Communist Party, in 1968. And then in 1980, the KKE of the Interior voted in favor of Greece's accession to the European Economic Community. It formed what we call Euro-Communist Party, that the Communist parties moderated and became pro-European integration, including the Italian Communist Party, which is no longer called the Italian Communist Party, but the Italian Communist Party led the charge towards Europe, Euro-communism it's called. It's consistently received about 3% of the popular vote in elections, with 3% the cutoff point for entry into the parliament. It became consistently more European Union, pro-European Union. The KKEI party outlook began to change in the early 2000s. And then in 2003, it was renamed the Coalition of the Radical Left, Syriza. That is Yanis Varoufakis' party, the person I showed you on that Democracy Now! Podcast on Monday. That's his party, that's him. And it united within its frame a number of leftist factions, Leninist, Trotskyite, Communist, and New Left. And it adopted an increasingly anti-systemic discourse. And it intensified in early 2008 when Alexis Tsipras became its leader at age 33. I thought his name was Yanis, but Tsipras, that's the guy that I showed you. The party's position on the EU displayed contradictions. The pro-European Union faction disregarded the party's leadership's position by voting against the ratification of the Lisbon Treaty. The Lisbon Treaty was the last major treaty of the European Union that came into force in 2009. And the Lisbon Treaty created the President of the European Union, which is today Charles Michel, the third one after Herman van Rompuy, and the former Donald Tusk, the former Prime Minister of Poland, and it's now Charles Michel, I think, of Belgium, is the President of the European Council. Then the European Union became a central focus of electoral politics in Greece after relatively low salience for three decades. I mean, you know, this is European Union integration is a focus of, or European Economic Community integration is a focus of the elite, but it becomes a popular issue when Greece has to get a 2010 bailout for its banks and financial system from the European Union and the International Monetary Fund. Elected only a few months earlier in October 2009, while promising a Keynesian-inspired macroeconomic Keynesian policy-inspired government spending package to revive the economy, George Papandreou's PASOK government signed the first memorandum of understanding, MOU, between Greece and its international creditors. And as I already mentioned, he's the son of Andreas Papandreou, the founder of PASOK. Of course, politicians being politicians, they like power. So even if, you know, this had to be done. Greece has to fix its problems. Greece has to fix its state. Of course, the other politicians blame George Papandreou and PASOK for the tremendous changes, the far-reaching changes in Greek life that the European Union and the IMF, and that means the United States, are demanding. So the center-right New Democracy Party refused to support the program, making Greece unique among the bailout recipients. So PASOK was left with the full political responsibility for the implementation of the bailout. And Papandreou's political authority disintegrated amidst the implementation. And in November, and so consequently, in November 2011, he called for a referendum on the second plan, conditional bailout. So Greece got 3 bailouts, 350 billion euros, right? In total. And so he wanted to strengthen his ability to negotiate with the European Union by showing the European Union that the people of Greece support him. So the European Union has to moderate its demands in terms of the changes it wants to see in Greece. So, and he is facing all this hostility, resistance to changing the Greek laws, changing the Greek way of life, basically. And so he calls for a referendum, a vote by the people of Greece on whether or not to accept the terms of the second bailout. Yeah, without this bailout, Greece is going to default on its debt, and it's going to have to leave the Eurozone and maybe leave the European Union. So how much leverage is the Greek government really going to have? I mean, you're asking for tens of billions of dollars of money from the European Union and IMF. And they're going to want something in return from the Greek government in terms of reforms in Greece. And but Papandreou is having great difficulty getting his Greek partners, his other Greek politicians and political parties to agree to what he wants to do. Center right, the New Democracy Party is refusing to support PASOK. And he calls for a referendum, and without consulting with the other members of the European Union. And it caused major disruptions on world financial markets, and the EU bitterly criticized the move. And so Papandreou was soon forced to resign, and he remains an important politician in Greece, but I never see his name come up again as a potential prime minister again for Greece. Instead, a new interim government was formed under Lukas Papademos, the former vice president of the European Central Bank. Again, keep in mind that Europe and European institutions and any Greeks that played a prominent role in European institutions, that they're going to bring being a modern European developed country to Greece. It's a source of political charisma in these countries that are post-colonial countries, basically. So its task was to implement the returns of the second rescue package, and new elections were called for the summer of 2012. I don't even, now that I come to think of it, I don't even encounter any comment about Tsipras becoming prime minister of Greece again, the leader of Syriza. He's hanging out, I think, and doing various European Union jobs, but I don't think anybody ever talks. And he's been replaced by Mitsotakis, a traditional family member of the conservative right, as prime minister. And I just, very interesting. The Greek political party scene became hyper-Europeanized as the two parliamentary elections of May and June 2012 indicated, with the main division being between pro and anti-bailout parties. PASOK's electoral support collapsed at 13.2%, while New Democracy also struggled, and support for anti-bailout parties skyrocketed, including the largest share went to Syriza. Right? It was the second largest party in the parliament behind New Democracy, and then two far-right parties emerged. There was a neo-Nazi party, Golden Dawn, emerged, whose leaders have recently been arrested over the last year or two for killings and crimes, including one Golden Dawn member that was a member of the European Parliament. And his parliamentary immunity was stripped away, and he was arrested for murder. And the populist independent Greeks, 89% of Greek citizens expressed that they were dissatisfied with the quality of democracy in Greece, and no party had a majority. So a grand coalition between PASOK and New Democracy formed under Antonis Samaras. I think Antonis Samaras is let me check his name. Antonis Samaras and I don't see anything for him. I'll just forget about it. He had formerly been a strong critic of the first. I'll make sure you can see that, of the first bailout. So go back to share screen. He now refashioned himself as a guarantor of Greece's continuing membership in the European Union. We've got to do the debate. Yes, so Yanis Varoufakis was the Minister of Economy at Tsipras. So you saw the interview of Yanis Varoufakis. He's the Minister of Economy that was being interviewed, and he was in charge of implementing the reforms. So he was the one that was interviewed on Democracy Now. I'm sorry, I confused the two. Tsipras, he is someone else. He's not that person on Democracy Now. But Yanis Varoufakis was the minister who was responsible under Tsipras for attempting to implement and negotiate with the European Union a final third bailout package. He condemned European Union for making Greece a debt colony, and so on. And Tsipras was forced to fire Varoufakis and other senior ministers. And he won election, continuing to win election in Greece, again, while trying to implement these far-reaching reforms in Greece. And then, of course, Mitsotakis emerges in 2016, and Syriza's never really recovered from carrying out and implementing the reforms that had to be carried out in Greece. And so Mitsotakis of the New Democracy Conservative Party is still there. So these parties that did what was necessary to get European Union support to save Greece's economy. First PASOK under George Papandreou, and then Tsipras and Mitsotakis, but mostly Tsipras, their political careers evidently, their hopes of ever becoming leaders of governments again in Greece, you never say never, but I never see their names come up. And instead, Greece is again under a traditional political party, New Democracy, under the son of the first Mitsotakis. The new younger son, the young boy Mitsotakis, is now Prime Minister of Greece and gets the economic and political benefits of the restructuring and the stabilization of the Greek economy. And so, but we're running out of time here, and I guess we should jump ahead to Spain. And Spain and Portugal joined the European Union in 1986. Sorry, I said 1984. They joined in 1986. It ended symbolically Spain's international isolation after Franco's dictatorship. And modern Spain has undergone its fastest transformation under a combination of European Union membership, democracy, and political decentralization. And before the 2008 financial crisis, Spain was among the fastest growing economies in the European Union. And it had become the 8th largest economy in the world, equaling in per capita income, and even maybe surpassing Italy. It had made strong progress in modernizing its state, modernizing its economic laws, including regulation of labor. And maybe the most notable is that Spain under Franco didn't have an environmental policy. So as a consequence of Spain joining the European Union, Spain developed an environmental policy for the first time. It didn't also have a history of protecting public health under that fascist dictatorship, but it developed the public health policy under the European Union. Remember, this is before this book was written, and published before COVID-19 crisis began, pandemic crisis began. And Spain has dealt with the pandemic, I think, better than many places. And many Spanish regional and local governments have exploited new modes of governance and participate in European networks which aid the sharing of experience, knowledge, and interests. So, of course, and Spain is formally a federation, and Catalonia and the Basque Country have much autonomy, but they want more. They want more control over their economic resources in the form of taxes that are collected in Catalonia, because Catalonia and the Basque Country are economically the most advanced, most developed, richest parts of Spain. And many people in Catalonia and the Basque Country view Madrid as representing as exploiting the hardworking, prosperous, hardworking Catalans and Basques, taking their hard-earned wealth to give it to backward, lazy, and corrupt others. By 2008, Spain was no longer a country of emigration. Instead, people go to Spain to get jobs. Between 1986 and 2010, it had turned to the largest recipient of immigrants in the European Union. And it had developed dynamic Spanish firms. It was the second largest, Spain was the second largest private investor in Latin America in 1996 to 2008, closely following the United States. So the Spanish government has tried to revive, develop in a democratic, social democratic way, its economic relations with Latin America. I mean, under the military dictatorships in Latin America and under Franco, of course, they had good relations when they were military dictatorships. But Latin America democratized as well in the 1970s and 80s, and as so did Spain. And so Spain has made a major commitment to promoting European Union interest in Latin America, opening up European Union to immigration from Latin America, and developing those ties that Spain had developed through the Spanish Empire that began in the 16th, in the 15th century in Latin America. And so the dual process of restructuring Francoist Spain from above and below has been most intense in Spain due to both political decentralization and European integration. There has been a nationwide consensus upon European integration in Spain, and exists until in terms of joining the European Economic Community. And this consensus existed until the Maastricht Treaty, and including the Catalan and Basque nationalist parties included. And just to conclude here before we go to our debate, that's one important reason why European integration is kind of problematic for some, because if you're a Catalan nationalist, you might really believe that you don't need to stay in Spain in order to have a prosperous, healthy, democratic, secure Catalonia. You don't need to stay in Spain because Spain is integrated in the European Union and everybody uses the euro. So you don't need to be part of Spain. You can dream the dream of leaving Spain and being an independent country and getting the benefits of being in the European Union. So ironically, European integration has affected Catalan and Basque nationalism, but particularly Catalan nationalism. And it is also encouraging Scottish nationalism in the United Kingdom. Now that the United Kingdom has left the European Union, there are a lot of Scottish nationalists who believe that we don't need to be part of Greater England in order to be prosperous and secure. We can try to join the European Union. Okay, so let's go to debate. And there's just too much to cover during the class time because there's too much information. So let's go to the debate. And we go to European politics. Okay, log in. And that person on democracy now, that's Varoufakis, the economy minister who had to oversee these negotiations. And Tsipras was a different person who's the prime minister under Syriza. But Syriza seems to have disappeared, or it's a mere shadow of itself. And we're back to new democracy. And maybe PASOK will really reemerge to some new form. So let's go to European Policy Society, then we go to vote, and we go to the debate, and debate topic. So it states, to South Koreans, the Cold War has had more impact on South Korea's development than on the development of Greece and Spain. And I'm wondering if I didn't bring my paper that has your pro and con statements on it in terms of what side you took, unfortunately. So I'm going to have to just form a breakout rooms, let you join which side you want to be on. So we're going to form 2 breakout rooms, and I will let you participants choose the rooms they want to join. So rename pro, yes, and we rename con, yes. And so open all the rooms. So please join pro or con, depending upon your position on the debate topic. If you are pro or con, please join pro or con on the debate topic. And Ella has joined pro. Anais, Gloria, are you pro or con? And Gloria?
I'm con.
Okay, so I'll send you to con.
Yeah,
And,
thank you.
Okay, and so there's another member who's not here. I don't know with Suzette or if she's going to come back or not, but okay, so Anais, please join pro. Ella, please begin our debate by making your pro statement on behalf of the debate topic. And Ella, please begin our debate by making your pro statement on the debate topic. So go ahead, Ella. Ella? Ella? You're muted, Ella. Unmute yourself, Ella.
Yeah.
Okay, Ella, make your pro statement on the debate topic.
Okay, I think to South Koreans, the Cold War impacted South Korea more than it did Greece or Spain. And I think that their view would revolve around the Han River miracle and the aid they received from the West and reconstruction after the Korean War. And also the splitting up of Korea into North and South Korea that still continues to this day. Both Greece and Spain don't have that problem. So that's kind of my pro statement.
Okay, now, all right, good job. Well, all right, Gloria. I got to close the rooms. So Gloria, you can hear me, Gloria, right? You're con.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm
Gloria,
con.
how can you just to play devil's advocate? How can you be con? How can you disagree with Ella? Why are you con, Ella, Gloria?
Because I don't think there is an Olympic of suffering needed to sometimes recognize that both countries have lost economic, political, and social privileges due to a crisis or war. It is true that we live more intensively the things that are closer from us than the things that concern people living further away. Nevertheless, we should not deny the endless suffering the Korean War during the Cold War period have put on Korea's shoulders. Korea became the place where the 2 big powerful blocs at that time fought and destroyed parts of the country. Europe has also suffered from the Cold War. In Spain, there is still nowadays some traces of fascism and Francoism. In Italy, fascism too. In Greece, the colonial regime, and Portugal, the Salazar put the city under pressure and crisis. Maybe these 2 European countries, Greece and Spain, have had it easier to rebuild their power because they have been part of the European Union entities where Korea was maybe more isolated. Nevertheless, European entities have had it difficult with the rise of communism. Extreme political wings and parties as seen, for instance, in the breakdown of the traditional European consensus amongst the parties, something that was already hinted at the Maastricht Treaty. The former communists opposed it.
Yeah, you know what I realized, everybody, Ella, Gloria, Anais,
Yeah.
is that what Gloria has basically made the point that basically this is a nationalist statement let me share the screen here. This is a nationalist oriented statement the debate topic that I came up with. I mean, there was a lot of individual suffering. We don't really know, for example, in that video, how many people died in the Spanish Civil War. I mean, and I know millions of people died in the Korean War. Yeah, okay. But but the point is, when you phrase a question like this, it's emphasizing the nation first over the human rights of individuals. That South Korea suffered more. It's like the problem with reification, like South Korea is this living, or Greece or Spain are these living, breathing things. They're not. And when we think about them in that way, it leads to emotional, stereotypical thinking. And I suffered more than you. Oh, no, I'm a victim. You're the oppressor. I'm a victim. No, I'm the victim. You're the oppressor, and you need to compensate. We need justice because I was wrong. I'm going to punish you. And no, you did crimes, and you have never come to grips with the crimes that you've committed. Everybody's calling each other victim, criminal, and viewing themselves as victims, and it just perpetuates this outdated nationalist zero-sum thinking that the European integration is supposed to overcome. That let's get over this and remember that we're all Europeans working for the well-being of Europe and Europeans. Whether they happen to live in Greece, or they happen to live in Spain, or they happen to live in Portugal, whether or not they happen to be born in Portugal or Spain or Greece or not. And focusing upon who committed what crimes to who. We need to do that perhaps because we need to talk about what happened, because that's been buried. I mean, that was the point, but that person that was representing the Greek, that was commenting about the Greek Civil War, that the Greeks just have never really investigated this. They haven't investigated. They don't know what happened. They know nobody. There's never been an accounting. They just know that there was tremendous bloodshed and suffering, and the people that did it, that pulled the trigger, that gave the order to kill civilians, have never been named. I mean, they're probably all gone. It's a long time ago, right? And that's why it's traumatic, but there's a limit to how much okay, we need to talk about it, we need to structure it, we need to investigate it. And I told you about that conference I went to at the same time that in 2007, when that video that I was showing you about the opening up the mass graves in Greece for the first time, the whole conference was on that topic about reconciliation, truth and reconciliation commissions, compensation, remuneration, in terms of crimes and atrocities that happened in the past. And I go to this conference in Barcelona, in Catalonia, and nobody at the conference is mentioned that the Spanish government just passed a law to do these very things that we're focusing on. Nobody mentioned it because they were afraid. This is such a sensitive topic, even though it happened 90 years ago. Okay, and the last person to speak is, go back to the breakout rooms, and that is Anais. Make your pro statement, Anais.
Yes, so while I agree that the economy has not, is still like not fully well again, I think that Greece and Spain can count on the European Union, and it is proven true when the KKE changed from being an anti-EU party to being a pro one, because they saw that being in the EU became profitable for them. And also Greece received help from the USA and Britain, like also money help, because they feared that Greece will fall against the Soviet Union, and I will get the advantage against them. So Greece has received a lot of help, and they remain unified to this day.
Okay. So, yeah. I mean, when you have a state of war, you have hundreds of thousands of troops still, in the most militarized border in the world between North and South Korea, the most militarized border in the world, with one country having nuclear weapons and threatening to use them if necessary. That's all ultimately a product of the Cold War, or at least was founded during the Cold War. Yeah, it's kind of hard to make that, kind of hard to say that the Cold War impacted Greece and Spain more than South Korea. I mean, South Korea, the reason why we're here is because South Korea exists because of the Cold War. That's why you're here. That's why I'm here, is because of the Cold War. Well, on that note, does Pro have a response? I mean, does Khan, I'm sorry, Khan have a response? Gloria? And Gloria, are you gonna, you
Yeah,
have a
yeah,
yes,
I'm here. Sorry,
You have
I
a
was
res-
muted.
you have a response?
For Anais?
Whoever, yeah.
I don't know, because I know that my view on that subject is more nationalistic than without any bias, because I come from Italy and I know that Sardinia suffered from also fascism in that period. So yeah, I know that South Korea was separated, and that Korea's reunification still have heavily weight on Korean people's shoulder and everything. But my historical view is, I think, a bit stressed by my ethnicity, and so yeah, I could respond to Anais, but I'm afraid that it will be more nationalistic than evidence based, and without any real knowledge about South Korea that I'm learning in other courses. So maybe in 1 week or 2 weeks I could respond more practically to Anais on that statement, but now I'm afraid to be biased. But I could find for the next course I could find two statement if you want, so I can like give the ball in return. But
Yeah, I mean,
now,
well, the emotion you feel, I mean, is an important point. I mean, I think that, I think that's an important point to note, that nationalism
Yeah.
is not going to go away. Nationalism,
Yeah.
and it's more powerful as national self-determination is a demand that has more political force because it's more attractive to more people than more individualistic universal rights like, protection of individual freedoms. So what to do with Catalonia nationalism, because the European Union does risk angering Spanish nationalists if it appears to be favoring the breakup of Spain, right? If it appears to be making it easier for Catalonia and the Basque Country to break away from Spain, it's going to make the millions of Spanish nationalists you saw demonstrating in support of Franco really angry. And that's been so the European Union always insists that it will not support Catalonia's independence. It only will support Spain. But we'll have to stop there and come back to these topics in future classes. So we'll meet in class on this coming Monday, okay? And that's it for today. Okay,
thank you very much.
Okay, I'll talk to you. I'll be in communication. Bye.